Don't you understand that everyone is filming their wrap-ups on the 1st of every month? Hi guys, this is Taylor. It is March 1st and it's time for my February wrap-up. You very well may have noticed that I took off a decent chunk of time in order to enjoy the Olympics. I took some time off both from making videos and to some extent from reading because I had other priorities. But I did manage to read 3 books this month and I also DNF'd one. And I'm totally satisfied with that because I really super enjoyed everything that I ended up finishing. So the first book that I finished in February was Eternal Life by Dara Horn. This was one of my most anticipated books of 2018 and hoo boy, it exceeded my expectations. The premise of this book is that our main character Rachel is thousands of years old. She cannot die, and she became this way when she made a spiritual bargain to save her son's life in ancient Jerusalem. There's also a man from her distant past who is following her through time, trying to convince her to come back to him. So my main concern when I started this novel was that it might try to romanticize the fact that this guy is following her century after century, because it's really not a great thing to have a guy stalk you for thousands of years, but it totally does not do that. The relationship between Rachel and Elazar is so rich and complex and within the context of the novel, so realistic. Actually, now that I'm looking back on it, I think it's one of the most interesting relationships I've ever read. In addition to that, Rachel as a character seems like she is 2,000 years old. There is this incredible sense of ancient wisdom in all of her thoughts and actions, and I just thought it was so well done. There are also these motifs of both the very old and the very new, so a decent portion of this takes place in ancient Jerusalem, and then in present times Rachel has a granddaughter who is studying genetic therapy and a son who is investing in cryptocurrency. On top of all of this, I found it extremely moving. There is so much rumination on the topic of eternal life itself and its pros and cons, things I had never considered before, and there just ends up being this unbelievable emotional depth. This was so close to a 5-star rating for me, and actually, now that I'm sitting here gushing about it, I don't really remember why I didn't rate it 5 stars in the first place. So, you know, it's either a really strong 4-star or I might end up bumping it up. Either way, I loved Eternal Life. It really, really impressed me. The next book I read in February was yet another one of my most anticipated releases, and that was The House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Cassara. This is a multi-perspective novel that begins in the 1980s in New York and follows the development of the House of Extravaganza. So this is set during the height of the New York ball scene. Every central character is LGBTQ in some way, and as you can imagine, all of these characters' lives are being directly affected by the HIV crisis. Basically, the reader knows that people are going to die, and the author knows that the reader knows that people are going to die. So death permeates the entire book from the very beginning. I fully expected this novel to come for my throat emotionally, but I was still surprised at how painful and horrifying it was, especially in the very last 10% or so. I'm gonna go ahead and issue pretty much every conceivable content warning for this novel. Abuse of many kinds, drugs, violence, gratuitous death, extreme homophobia, extreme transphobia. If you are particularly affected by any of those, I would recommend steering clear of this novel. Despite all of that, Joseph Cassara manages to paint such a vibrant portrait of such a bleak circumstance. I particularly like the writing style, which is very rough and colloquial, and I love the author's use of Spanish and Spanglish because it's so realistic to how these characters would actually talk to each other. I think The House of Impossible Beauties could very well become kind of a cult classic. It has all of the ingredients, and this portrayal of these characters in this time period is so important. This got another strong 4 stars from me. Switching gears completely, the last book that I completed in February was Dot Journaling, A Practical Guide by Rachel Wilkerson Miller. I, like everyone on the internet, am very intrigued by dot or bullet journaling. However, I was never really able to find a single video that spells it all out in a very detailed and understandable way. And I saw this at the library and I thought that maybe the book format would lend itself better to my understanding of bullet journals. And really it did just that for me. It starts at the very beginning, it defines the vocabulary, the formatting, it gave so many different structural ideas that made my brain excited. There's a couple different ideas for tracking your reading and your TBR, which appeals to us for obvious reasons. There's even a section where she goes over different brands of pens and washi tape and their pros and cons in incredible detail. My one critique is that I would have appreciated a little more discussion about different brands of journals, because I know there's a lot of discourse on that topic. So I was looking for more practical ideas about the uses of the bullet journal and different formatting ideas, with much less emphasis on the aesthetics of things, like the Instagram or the Pinterest side of things, which is exactly what this was, even though it does talk a little bit on how to make your journal more visually appealing. So I gave this 5 stars. It was really everything that I wanted it to be, and I'm really considering starting a bullet journal now and becoming one of those people, because it makes my brain happy. So lastly and briefly, the book that I DNF'd this month was unfortunately The Will to Whatevs by Eugene Mirman. I picked this up after finishing The House of Impossible Beauties because I desperately wanted to laugh. I love Eugene Mirman as a comedian, and this is his guide to life, as it were. It's basically just a lot of nonsensical life advice, and I just think his style of humor didn't really translate to book format. I just hit 80 or so pages and I had this realization that I was not enjoying the reading process and that I wanted to be doing other things. So this will be donated and be relieved of its duties on my shelves. So that was February. It was really not a bad reading month, and these new releases are killing it so far. Feel free to let me know how your reading went, how your Olympics went, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!